All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can follow us on X and on Instagram at Big Ben Show Fox. Follow me on X at bdomenech. I hope that you'll check out all the clips that we're sharing and share them with your friends. Read, react, leave a comment. Really appreciate the interaction that you have with our show. I want to talk to you today about the backlash and the response from those supporters of what the president is doing in Iran, both coming from the right side of the aisle in terms of their political ideology. First, let's talk about Andy McCarthy of the National Review. Andy is somebody who I have been critical of for many years now, particularly connected to his defense of the Department of Justice and what I believe to be his highly naive approach to the way that he wrote about the Jack Smith investigation, the Robert Mueller investigation, and others, where time and time again he defended the actions of the DOJ, only to have it revealed that they had behaved much worse than he ever thought conceivable. Some of these things he's apologized for in terms of his perspective at the time. Most of them he hasn't. And I view him as someone who is particularly naive, not just about the world as it stands today, but about the world of politics. And when it comes to the issue of Iran, I believe that his latest in the National Review, Trump Prepares His Iran Off-Ramp, is one of the most naive and stupid things I've ever read from Andy McCarthy in his entire career. I say this without any respect for Andy McCarthy as a political analyst. You can respect him as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, as all these other things. I know more about politics than Andy McCarthy. Here's the thing that I think you need to understand about his analysis. It is undermined by every piece of data that we have. He writes in part, "We actually needed a communications plan before invading Iran. I'd add this maxim because war making carries great risk and is apt to fail calamitously in the absence of public support. The further we are from an actual threat, the greater is the president's political need for congressional support. A legislative authorization of military force is a prudential requirement, regardless of one's view about whether it is a legal mandate. The president has flailed this week. No one who watched his erratic performance when the COVID-19 pandemic challenged his leadership skills in his first term can be surprised. We'll demand regime change or not, unconditional surrender or not, ground troops off the table or not on the table, reinstatement of the draft or no such plans or no plans for now." That's because the president didn't seek the country's support. He wouldn't go to Congress. He wouldn't try to make a persuasive case. He wants to be an autocrat in a system and a culture that resists autocracy. He went with his gut, and this is what he's got. He also has a bunch of other things in here about criticizing the president for wearing baseball caps and his belief that the Iranian regime is far tougher than even our military analysts believe. Don't listen to Andy McCarthy when it comes to politics. And here's the lesson. If you look at the actual poll data from the different things that the president has done in the past, when it comes to Operation Midnight Hammer, when it comes to what he did when it came to Venezuela, support for his effort went up following success. The idea that you need to make the case for this to the American people in the same way and then go to Congress, something that would take an enormous amount of time, might result in Congress overruling you, and then you'd have to do it over their wishes, is essentially a European idea. The idea that you're going to have to go through all these meetings, these bureaucratic conflabs, trying to get the French on board to come along with you, trying to convince Keir Starmer and the Brits that they need to send one of their hinky, remaining ships that actually works in order to have some type of coalitional buy-in. That is something of the past. It is not something that Americans expect or demand from their commander-in-chief. In this moment, in fact, the president's willingness to act, his willingness to act alongside the Israelis, cooperating with them, and now it seems cooperating with more and more of our friends in the Gulf, perhaps strengthening even the Abraham Accords, is something that stands to a great assessment of his ability to understand the moment in a way that someone like Andy McCarthy does not. I do not believe we owe any kind of respect to this tired old generation that has not learned any lessons from the last 25 years about how we conduct war and how much Congress has become a completely useless entity when it comes to making decisions about war. You can have an argument about war powers. You can have an argument about the Constitution. That's fine. But to say that it's politically smart and politically unwise to make a case that then takes months and months and months, perhaps years, of making an argument before you actually pull the trigger, all the while giving the time to the enemy to build up themselves into an even stronger foe rather than kicking them when they're down. That's madness. And it's something that actually risks the lives of Americans far greater than anything that would require the kind of trigger pull that the president has been willing to do in this instance. Regardless of the outcome in Iran, the idea that we should go back to that old way of making the case for war is absurd in today's modern connected era. It is something of the past. It's like running, an offense from the 1960s. And I'm sorry, I don't think that we have to give it any kind of due respect. It's absurd, and it puts more American lives at risk. Another person who's willing to put American lives at risk, of course, is our famed senator from South Carolina, good old Lindsey Graham.
Now, President Trump, thank God he was there. He's the right guy at the right time. And when he heard they were that close to 10 weapons, he acted. And you know what? When this is over, we're going to obliterate their nuclear program, and there's going to be a new dawn in the Mideast. President Trump, you did the right thing. God bless you. And Steve and Jared, you literally saved the world from terrorism. To our Arab friends, I've tried to help you construct a new Mideast. You need to up your game here. I can't go to South Carolina and say we're fighting and you won't publicly fight. What you're doing behind the scenes, that has to stop. The double dealing of the Arab world when it comes to this stuff needs to end. I go back to South Carolina. I'm asking them to send their sons and daughters over to the Mideast. What I want you to do in the Mideast, our friends in Saudi Arabia and other places, step forward and say, this is my fight too. I join America. I'm publicly involved in bringing this regime down. If you don't, you're making a great mistake, and you're going to cut off the ability to have a better relationship with the United States. I say this as a friend.
Lindsey Graham has, I think, just such an attraction to the cameras that he goes and runs in front of them and says a lot of things that don't actually help his case. It's not something new when it comes to Lindsey, who has obviously become associated with the most warmongering activity, the most willingness to send American sons and daughters overseas for any cause whatsoever over the past decade plus. Look, I do not think that he is speaking in any way at this point that is helpful to the president of the United States. If you had Marco Rubio out front, if you had the president himself out front saying some of these things, that would be far more helpful. But when it comes from Lindsey, the simple fact is that he has so much baggage when it comes to these issues of saying that we should be getting involved in virtually every area of the world, that people raise their hackles up. They view him as someone who's willing to commit anywhere and to send innumerable resources and risk the lives of Americans without thinking about the consequences necessarily. And because he speaks so consistently in this way and so loudly, I think that unfortunately he's doing his own cause, a real detriment. It is not helpful to hear this from him. It's helpful to hear it from people who've had more experience with combat and war in the last decade plus, people who have seen the experience of Iraq and Afghanistan, who can say this is not the same thing. That includes, by the way, Pete Hegseth. Whatever you think of Pete, I think he's someone who can actually speak with authority when it comes to not wanting to commit to some kind of long-term, forever war, boots on the ground situation where we have to remake Iran. That's something that I think Lindsey and some of his fellow cohort who have long favored regime change in Iran, and who certainly behind the scenes support this, even if many of them have become public critics of the president after all the years of the tensions between the neoconservative side of the conservative movement and the presidency. Virtually all neocons are now members of the Democratic Party. I just think that the situation at this point is one where he would be better to just go silent for a while. Let things work out. Don't try to associate yourself so dramatically with the decisions that are being made by Gulf nations or by those who are fighting this war. And when it comes to the Saudis, I don't think that there's going to be anybody who listens to this and is going to make any different determination. Let the president determine this. Let the vice president determine this. Let Marco Rubio determine this, and Pete Hegseth as well. Don't put yourself out forward, because as soon as people hear this, they immediately think to themselves, isn't that guy who wanted us to stay on the ground for years and years and years and ruined the lives of so many people in my generation because he didn't want to pull out and said we just needed to stay the course no matter what happened? I just think that that's too tinged with the memories of the past, and I think he would be wise to recognize that. The critics of the president who are currently active, I think, on the right are largely not representative of the degree to which the Republican Party and supporters of Donald Trump are emphatically in favor of this war. And I also think that Wall Street, despite the fact that many people have been concerned about the price of oil and the like, showed some real signs this week that as long as you can clear the strait, as long as you can do the kinds of things that we're able to do with these Iranian ships that are putting down mines, the things that the American military are capable of as it relates to that are going to be, I believe, significant encouragement to them. I don't think that the risk long term for the president is really showing itself yet, but I do think that he has to be on guard. Certainly, as Andy McCarthy acclaimed, he is not looking for an off-ramp. The president wants to resolve this. He wants to get it done during his presidency, and he does not want to leave some regime that can, just a few years now, hence, threaten America or our friends and allies again with the kind of nuclear weapons that they tried to achieve. That's responsible governance. I'm Ben Domenech. You're listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can follow us on X at Big Ben Show Fox. Check out our clips, share them with your friends, and like and follow us. We'll be back with more right after this. Happy to welcome back to The Big Ben Show Rafael Mangual. He is the Nick O'Neill Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a contributing editor of City Journal, and member of the Council on Criminal Justice. You can follow him on X at Rafa_Mangual. I want to talk to you about the events that happened in New York outside of Gracie Mansion and the follow-on to it. But first off, I'd like to get some perspective in terms of the experience that we've seen under new Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Have you been surprised at all at his unwillingness to condemn some of these violent actions or threats that have come from those that, frankly, are associated with his side of the radical wing of the Democratic Party? Or is this something where you kind of expected this to be the way things would go?
No, the way things are going are exactly in line with my expectations. Zohran Mamdani has a history, right? He came into this office with a history, with a political identity. And I think he understands that one of his political vulnerabilities is his association with the movement that a lot of people have labeled anti-Semitic or sympathetic to terror groups like Hamas. And so he understands that to the extent that this angle gets played up, it hurts him. And so I don't think that it's surprising at all that he seems to be willing to downplay the connection.
The images from that protest and that attempted terrorist attack have rocketed around the internet. We've seen the depiction of a heroic NYPD official, leaping over to tackle the situation. At the same time, it seems to me like this is the easiest opportunity for the mayor to lean into the opposite kind of narrative, to basically say, this is great. This is an opportunity for me to back the police. This is outside my home, where my family lives, where my kids sleep, etc. Why do you think that it is so important for him not to do that, but instead to do the kind of thing that he did afterwards, hosting a dinner with an activist who had been detained because of his violent and illegal behavior in support of the Palestinian and Hamas cause?
Yeah, I don't know that he thinks it would have been important. I think, what we're seeing is just his natural instincts, right? It would have been incredibly unnatural for Zohran Mamdani to come out and praise the police in a very explicit way and to sort of have his comments and the narrative that he spun around the story sort of revolve around the heroism of the NYPD. I also think he wants to move past that issue in part because it raises a lot of questions about how he and his department have handled, situations such as these and, about the wisdom of some of the things that he has proposed in terms of policing protests or not policing protests.
The protest that was taking place in front of Gracie Mansion was quite small. The reports had put it around 20 people, and that there was a much larger, counter protest. This seems like the kind of thing that should have been, a blip on our radar. The activity of these two young men and their intent to create murder and mayhem had to come as a shock in terms of the crowd involved. You don't normally see significant levels of threats for something that's so small. Do you think that this is going to be a precedent for things that go forward in terms of the parades, the activities, the kind of normal protests that take place in New York City all the time?
Yeah, look, I do, but I also just want to sort of resist the premise just a little bit, because I do think that this particular protest last Saturday did carry with it likely much more risk than your sort of run-of-the-mill gathering in a city like New York. I mean, you have to consider the broader context, right? The city was about a week out, or as to say, a week into a heightened terror threat alert level as a result of the hostilities in Iran. So you have a protest planned that is associated with that subject matter, at least tangentially. Then you have a much larger counter protest. You have to consider the fact that the leader of the initial protest, this Jake Lang character, does have a history of inspiring sort of violent responses to his presence and to his provocations. So you have already the possibility for violence just as a result of the nature of the provocation, but then you also have the context, given the heightened terror threat alert level, the subject matter of the protest, and then it's occurring at an incredibly sensitive location, right? This was outside Gracie Mansion. This is the home of the mayor, as you said. My guess is, and I'd be interested to see, what it said, but that there was a threat assessment done by the NYPD. And I do think that this is a lesson that moving forward, when you have so many of these flags attached to a single event, that it cannot be policed just by, precinct officers and community affairs, that what you really need there is some kind of counterterrorism element like the SRG, or Security Response Group, which Zohran Mamdani came out on the campaign trail as promising to abolish, and has not moved away from that position. I'm hoping that what happened on Saturday will be a wake-up call.
You anticipated my next question, which is, given the fact that Mamdani literally ran on gutting a lot of these different elements of the NYPD, and whatever you could say about the NYPD's controversies or anything like that, they are one of the most lauded and incredible police forces on the face of the earth. The fact that he ran against their units and against their kind of targeted efforts, is that something that is going to come more and more to fore as you have these types of threats potentially play out in future incidents in New York City?
Oh, I think it absolutely will. I mean, Zohran Mamdani is someone who is incredibly comfortable in, ideological debates, right? He is committed ideologically. He's a great communicator of his ideology. But ideology will always run up against reality. And in a city like New York that remains a top target of terrorism, I don't think it's sustainable to hold a position and an ideological commitment that puts units like the NYPD's SRG on the back burner, if not taking them off the table entirely. The risk is not going to go away. Right, New York is going to remain a target of terror groups like ISIS, like Al Qaeda, like the Taliban, and like their sympathizers. Right, I mean, this is one of the other problems, is that the United States of America is a very large country with a very wild mix of people in a way, and there are some people, enough, a critical mass, who are sympathetic to some of these groups, and it is possible for some of these actors to get picked off by this hateful a death cult and pursue their hate through violence. And I think that's what we saw on Saturday. So, Zohran Mamdani can maintain his commitment to the depolicing ethic all he wants, but the reality is going to continue to be the case, and that is that New York's a target. That makes it important for it to take steps to mitigate risks, and protests in particular are a soft target. So you can't have these large gatherings without a robust police presence. Now, Mamdani's of the left, the ACLU types, they hate the idea of quote unquote policing protests. But the reality is that if protests become, soft targets that get exploited, guess what? Everyone's rights are violated.
Mm-hmm. I don't want you to speculate too much about the individuals who tried to perpetuate this terrorist attack, but to the degree that we know things about this 18 and 19-year-old who came over from Pennsylvania in the suburbs, seem to have comfortable American lives in terms of their backgrounds. What do we know, if anything, about how they were radicalized? What led them to come into the city and do this type of blatant behavior? They didn't seem to be interested in hiding their identities at all. They were doing it right out in the open, in daylight. That's not something that you normally see in these types of situations.
Yeah, it's not something that you normally see, but it does indicate that they were completely radicalized and bought in. And in a lot of these cases, right, I mean, you have instances where the perpetrators of really violent acts don't expect necessarily to get away with it. And have accepted the possibility of not living through the ordeal, right? You see this a lot with, mass shooters who either take their own lives or, go down in a blaze of gunfire. So I can't really say what radicalized them specifically. My guess is that a lot of this happened online, like everything else these days. But it's not, it doesn't shock me all that much. This is something that we have seen. We have seen Americans with comfortable lives get radicalized. I mean, I have personal experience with this. I went to high school with one Samir Khan, who was killed in a drone strike with Anwar al-Awlaki. This was a guy who grew up in a very nice, very pleasant suburb of Nassau County, just outside of New York City, in a upper middle class life, and he had no no hardship really. And yet, this was a person who, in the wake of 9/11, decided to take up the cause of al-Qaeda and became their chief propagandist. So, there is something about this ideology that is intoxicating for people who are particularly vulnerable. My guess is that these two individuals, fell under that spell. And I have no sympathy for whatever happens to them now.
So much for nose rings and face tattoos as rebellion against your parents. The thing that sticks out to me as well about this, of course, is the follow-on reaction from the media. And I wanted to get your reaction to something that we saw on CNN yesterday from one Abby Phillip.
Two Republicans say Muslims don't belong here after an attempted terror attack against New York's Mayor Zohran Mamdani, and the House Speaker Mike Johnson says nothing really to condemn those comments.
This kind of thing reminds me of the old Norm Macdonald comment.
I was just thinking that.
Yes, exactly. about what the dangers of what would happen after a radical Islamic attack. But the real question I have for you here is, there seemed to be a lockstep reaction by legacy media, the New York Times, CNN, others as well, to almost immediately play down what was very obvious about what happened here. The Abby Phillip comment is even further, saying, depicting it as an attack on the mayor, which most obviously was not. Why do you feel like they think that they can get away with framing these attacks in such a way after all of the years that we've had of seeing the reality come through very quickly for people to understand what really went on?
I think they can get away with it because it does work. I will tell you that even yesterday, I spoke to people who were relatively well informed, who were under the impression that the mayor was himself the target of this attack. So it does work. It does create a narrative. It does create a cushion. It may not last forever, but it can, I think, mitigate some of the immediate backlash, which is maybe their goal. Look, I think a lot of people on the left understand that Zohran Mamdani is a sort of rising star in their movement, and they also understand that his association with the sort of October 7th, post-October 7th debate is a vulnerability for him. And when you have somebody coming in, who's as grotesque as Jake Lang is, saying that, we have to fight the Islamification of America. And then at that very event, some of the more bombastic risks actually come to pass, it's not a great look. And so, I think there's a lot of effort that's going to be put into obfuscation when something like that happens. But ultimately, the American people deserve better from their legacy media. And this is why trust in those institutions has been eroding consistently for, the last decade plus.
I'm going to ask you a slightly more difficult question, and you can feel free to push back against me. In my own experience, in the last several years, I have heard far more expressions along the lines of what we've heard from some Republican politicians in the past couple of weeks about, let me summarize it thus. The level of Muslim integration or immigration that we have allowed in this country was a mistake. We have allowed too many of them to come in. We have allowed them to persist in their communities. They are not interested in integrating. They are interested in taking over our communities. We feel like they have not accepted the compromise that is essential when it comes to becoming part of America. And we believe that they are fundamentally anti-American in their aims when it comes to politics and when it comes to governance. I have heard that expressed sometimes, obviously, in less, policy-driven terms. But I've heard it expressed by a lot of people who are not people who are watching the extremes of the radical right, and not people who you would typically expect to necessarily hold those views. You might think of them more in the category of those who were once bleeding heart evangelicals or the like. I've heard it from people in Texas, particularly, that they are very concerned about the populations that are there. There's been some reporting around that as well. I've heard it from people in Northern Virginia, where there is a sizable, Islamic population that kind of stands out in part because they have a very, close-knit community and, attend events and kind of people become nervous or they become uncomfortable around those who do not speak their language and who have their own kind of formal governance regime within the context of American life. I hear that more and more. How does a Republican politician who perhaps does not agree with that entirely, but accepts that there's a problem here on some level, how do they navigate that situation and talk about it without sounding like they are drifting into Jake Lang, Nick Fuentes territory?
Yeah, I think they have to speak candidly, but also carefully, right? I do think that there's a very clear line between, what someone like Jake Lang or Nick Fuentes is doing in the world and what people who are expressing very reasonable anxiety about, a very fast growing population that may have large components that are not interested in integration. And it's not as if we don't have examples from other parts of the world of, how this can kind of go wrong. I think a lot of people are looking, to Western Europe and places like the United Kingdom are again, I think, feeling natural and reasonable anxieties. It is important for any country to maintain its identity. And in order to do that, it has to be careful and deliberate about who it lets into its country. And that's not to say, that we should just be immigration restrictionists, that, the Republican Party should embrace this wholeheartedly. I don't think that's the case. I do think that, immigrants from all over the world have a lot to offer and, have played a big role in the growth of not just this country, but others. However, you have to do that intelligently. What you cannot do is throw considerations like assimilation out the window, because when you do that, you risk the country losing its identity. You risk an imbalance, and no one is going to benefit from the instability that will arise out of that. And so, I think Republicans have to recognize that these concerns are real, take steps to distinguish themselves from the more kind of bombastic and frankly racist elements of the far right that are trying to co-opt this debate. But you cannot fear. You can't shy away from having these conversations, right? Because the problem's not going to go away.
Does someone like Khalil, the activist that Zohran Mamdani hosted at Gracie Mansion, are we obligated to allow him to stay in America?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Nor do I think he should have ever been let in the first place, at least in hindsight. That's a perfect example of a reasonable line that I think most Americans want to see drawn, right? But you have somebody who's political and ideological commitments are completely in opposite to everything that this country stands for. This is somebody who has expressed support for, at the very least sympathy for, a designated foreign terrorist organization in Hamas, who has excused the violence and rape and torture and brutality that took place on October 7th in Israel as, quote unquote, violent resistance against oppression that is legitimate. I mean, It's not violent resistance. It's an act of terrorism. And if the United States is not careful about who it opens its doors to, it will become vulnerable to a very toxic ideology. And that's not just a concern that's limited to the Muslim world, by the way. So, again, I think we can have these conversations intelligently. I think we can be more circumspect about how we articulate our thoughts. But we should not ignore the very reasonable anxieties that I think a lot of Americans feel when they see large groups of people who don't seem willing to assimilate to American life, and who don't, share America's values.
One thing that I think has been a real holdover from Bush era Republicanism, and even before that, is an unfortunate approach to the way that they talk about immigration that is entirely based on the assumption that the people who come here want to live in the American dream, that they want to participate in American society. It's kind of an argument about job displacement and things like that from the 2000s. I feel like what I see on Capitol Hill includes a lot of arguments that are still taking place in that tenor, when in reality, what I hear from American citizens and what I hear from voters is about, I'm worried about the people who come here who have no interest in living in that way, who want to establish their own culture, their own society, and their own government within America and undermine what we have here and what we feel like we are losing as birth rates decline, as people feel the fraying of our own civil society. Do you feel like there's a way to actually thread that needle without just being depicted, as so many of these others are, as a virulent racist who is going to, is an Islamic phobic? That's the old saw. That views every Hispanic person in their neighborhood as a potential gangbanger or something like that.
Right.
Is there a way to navigate that? Or is it just like it comes with the territory? You can't criticize this without CNN calling you that.
Yeah, look, I think the answer is both yes and no, right? There is a way to navigate this, and there is a way to gain ground and to make progress in the broader public debate with people who are reasonable, with people who are open to being convinced. However, that is what's not going to go away is that people, particularly on the left, are going to continue to sort of take advantage of the tension involved in this kind of public debate and use that to try and vilify people on the right who are concerned about immigration. And they're going to do that by calling them racist, by calling them Islamophobic, which is something I get called on a very regular basis, unfortunately, despite the fact that I am, the son of an immigrant, and that I am, a brown-skinned Latino man, if as people would introduce themselves back at the height of peak woke.
Well, that just makes you a bad ally.
That's right. I'm a traitor. I am disloyal. But no, look, I do think that there are a lot of reasonable Americans, including immigrants and children of immigrants, who absolutely want to see restrictions on populations and subpopulations that are not interested in assimilation. Again, I come from an immigrant family, but it is an incredibly patriotic one. It is, their houses you will see, American flags. You will see people who serve this country. You will see people who, absolutely want to see America thrive, and came to this country precisely because they bought into America's values. And they are just as suspicious, if not more suspicious, of people who come to this country and don't exhibit that kind of, that same willingness to integrate and assimilate and to advance the interests of the nation as articulated at its founding.
Last question for you. The mayor's early tenure has been a bit rocky, to say the least. What kind of grade would you give him at this point in terms of two different things? One, enacting his agenda, which is not necessarily indicative of your support for it, but how good has he been at it? And two, being what people expected in terms of his approach to this job. I think a lot of people had a lot of pie in the sky expectations for Zohran Mamdani. How closely is he matching up with them?
I think the second question is probably harder, so I'll start with the first, which is, in terms of enacting his agenda, I'll give him a B minus. I mean, it is early, right? It takes time to make some of these changes, but his agenda was pretty big. It had some big ticket items throughout, and none of those have really come to pass yet. I mean, he has made the appointments that you would expect him to make that I think will make his base happy. He has taken some steps in the directions that he's indicated, but the rent is still not frozen. Taxes still haven't been raised, right? No, there's still not a new budget passed. The NYPD is still operating. SRG still exists. We still have a gang database. All the things that the big ticket items that he promised to do have not really been done. So I'll give him a B minus C plus there. Give him some time. In terms of, look, I do think that his base is happy. At least if what you see on X is any indication. The people that were by his side during the campaign, I think remain by his side. I don't think that he's alienated any of the people, that supported him yet. So, I mean, I guess overall, I'd give him maybe a C plus, B minus, but not because I I agree with any of what he hopes to do. Right?
Sure.
I mean, I would very much.
Well, but I think I think it's significant because I think that people assess politicians based on success or perceived success, and it seems to me that as long as he can establish a narrative of success, it is a help to his wing of the Democratic coalition. Regardless of what other Democrats, as your own Manhattan Institute indicates in their latest poll, which we talked about significantly want in terms of a return to normalcy. You can follow Rafael Mangual on X at Rafa_Mangual. He is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on The Big Ben Show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Happy to be joined on the Big Ben Show today by the Senator from Texas, John Cornyn. Thank you so much, Senator Cornyn, for taking the time to join me. I know that you are in the midst of what has been a challenging and expensive campaign, one that has resulted in a runoff and that is, gotten a lot of attention nationally for the tensions involved there. How do you feel that it's going? How do you think that you're going to continue to prosecute the case against your opponent there? And do you believe that, as many in Washington have talked, that there's going to be an endorsement coming from the president in the coming days or weeks?
Well, I'm grateful to the voters who put me in the first position in this runoff. We won the vote, the plurality of the vote. And of course, the race would be over but for the intervention of Congressman Wesley Hunt, who came in, I think, roughly around 15% of the vote. So this pushes us into a May 26th runoff, which means that we're actively working on that. Unfortunately, Ben, these races don't generate a large turnout. And so there was roughly about 11% of registered voters who voted in the initial primary in Texas, the Republican primary. So, and actually the Democrats outvoted us, which is a warning sign, I think, to all of us. But I'm grateful for the fact that we were able to come in first, and we are actively focusing our attention on the choices that the voters will be given. I've made no secret of the fact that I think the Attorney General is unfit for this office. I think he jeopardizes not only the seat, which is Texas, as you know, has been a ruby red seat for a long time. We haven't elected a Democrat since 1994. And I think he also jeopardizes the down ballot races, including the 5 new congressional seats that the president is depending on in order to prevent the House from losing the majority. And at least certainly we need to do our part in Texas. And then third, the problem is that even if he can win, which I'm skeptical of, if he were the nominee, it would divert a lot of resources away from some of these key races in places like Georgia, Michigan, New Hampshire, where we actually have a chance of picking up ground. So I'm certainly would welcome the president's support. He sort of indicated he was leaning that way, but he hasn't made the decision yet. And but we're not waiting around. We would welcome it when and if the president decides to make that endorsement.
The president was asked the other day about the fact that Ken Paxton had suggested that even if the president endorsed you, that he would not stop his run or drop out of the race. The president indicated that that would displease him. What did you think about the president's remarks in that context, just given his reaction to it?
Well, I know the president doesn't like that sort of thing very much, and the attorney general has sort of made his case based on his devotion to the president and his cause. I've also pointed out I voted with the president 99.3% of the time. I know because I've been doing this a while, some people were maybe that's something they didn't know, and we had to remind them of. But I always felt that when you're in the majority party, it's important to support the president of your party. And that's exactly what I've done. And I've been proud of doing that. But I do think maybe the attorney general was angling for some sort of deal to be made. I don't know if he wants the soft landing.
Does he want a job? Do you feel like he wants a job in Washington?
Yeah, the president's clear. There are no quid pro quos, but if something happened to open up and be an opportunity for him, maybe that would be something he'd be willing to consider. But the problem is we're going to end up spending a lot of money in this runoff that we could save, number one, for the general election, and number two, wouldn't be diverted from these other competitive seats around the country.
Mm-hmm. The Democrats chose to nominate James Tallarico, who was, according to the folks in Washington and the national Democrats, the preferred candidate of the establishment. They viewed him as much more competitive and have tried to depict him as a moderate or a centrist versus his opponent, Jasmine Crockett. Why are you the better candidate when it comes to taking on Tallarico, who has already gotten the, looking into the middle distance photographic treatment from the Atlantic, and certainly got boosted quite a bit by his antics with Stephen Colbert?
Well, I've made no secret of the fact that I think Tallarico is dangerous. And the reason he's dangerous is because he is a wolf in sheep's clothing. We've seen that recently in Virginia, where Congressman Spanberger won the race and promptly discarded all of her moderate demeanor. And
she's about to ban all of our guns.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, of course, how Joe Biden won the election in 2020. He pretended to be, your favorite crazy uncle, and it turned out he was nothing more than a front man for the next Obama term. But so I think, in 2020, when I ran, I won by 10 points in Texas. So I think I would be successful in helping not only keep the seat red, but also winning down ballot. Tallarico will raise a ton of money. As you know, Republicans have been at a disadvantage recently because Democrats have this web portal called Act Blue, where they raise small donations nationwide. And Texas is a big, expensive place to run in, but I have no doubt that Tallarico will be well funded. So if the Attorney General were his opponent, he doesn't have a very good record of being able to raise much money in his own campaigns, and I think it would jeopardize that seat. So I think I can help not only keep the seat red, but help down ballot as well.
Talk to me a bit about what you're seeing in Texas on the ground when you're talking to people, particularly when you're talking to voters who had come into Donald Trump's coalition in the last presidential election, who may have qualms about voting Republican again. There's a lot of concern on the national level that the president's coalition, the one that he's built, which was obviously impressive and included a lot of diversity, included a lot of new Hispanic voters, expanded things into territory that Republicans have not traditionally won, that electorate is also one that doesn't really pay attention to midterms, and that getting them to the polls in support of Republican candidates this cycle is going to be very difficult. Is that something that you're seeing on the ground in Texas? Have you seen some peel away when it comes to support, particularly from Hispanic voters and the like? And how do you deal with it, if so?
Well, it certainly is a concern. And, there's in Republican primaries, the president is the dominant figure by far. And that's why his endorsement would be welcome if he chooses to do it. But even if he doesn't, I think people want to know about my support for the president's policies. I don't think personality-wise, people are going to confuse me with the president and vice versa. He has a different way of handling himself and things. And, that's what I think makes him very attractive to a lot of people, including Hispanics, interestingly enough. But the big challenge is going to be that his name isn't going to be at the top of the ballot. Mine will be. The Senate race will be the top of the ballot. Hispanics, as you mentioned, are a very important part of the electorate. And because I've been doing this a while, I've developed relationships all across the state, including with many of the folks in the Hispanic community that don't necessarily support me just because I'm a Republican. They support me because they know me and they trust me. And that goes a long way, I think, among Hispanic voters. But Tallarico is, as I said, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and he's preaching this version of Christianity that I don't recognize, and I doubt many Hispanics who are, by and large, either if they're not Roman Catholic or evangelicals, they will find it a very strange sort of interpretation of the Bible and of religion generally. So I don't think he's going to sell as well as the mainstream media suggests he will. I think, they're cheering him on like he's Beto 2.0.
Do you, I know that you're a student of political history, and you are well aware of how much the great sort has shifted the awareness of the two-party coalitions as it relates to, not just the shift of Roman Catholics toward Republicans and the like. It seems to me that Tallarico is someone who is only really possible to depict as being a voice of traditional Christianity if you don't really know what that means anymore. Is that kind of an indication of where the Democratic Party is today?
Yeah, I think, it seems like because he's a little different than certainly Jasmine Crockett was, that's why the press says, oh, he's the newest, freshest thing on the block. But there's not a lot of analysis of really what he is saying. That will change in the general election. We will dissect everything he has said and expose it for what it is. And I think he will be unelectable if we have the right candidate. And I think if we nominate somebody who has enormous baggage in his own right and has a hard time raising money, I think there's a real risk here. But you may have heard I created in my own campaign a faith advisory council, and these are some of the most well-known names in evangelical circles. And that's, I think, going to prove very significant too, because I think these are the sorts of voices and people who will be able to talk about what is true Christianity and what is sort of what I've heard somebody refer to as fake Christianity. To say God is not binary and abortion sanctioned in the Bible and, all this crazy stuff. Transgender is, surgery for minors. I think people are smart enough to be able to understand that if they have somebody they trust explaining it. And so that will be a part, I'm sure, of our campaign against Tallarico.
One of the things that Ken Paxton has used against you, though, is trying to depict you as being softer on immigration and on border policy, something that is true of a lot of, or what I would say is something that sounds like the kind of opinions that a lot of evangelical leaders in Texas, who I've listened to over the years, they certainly sound softer than President Trump on the issue and that type of thing, or they have historically, perhaps not so much recently in the wake of the Biden flood of people across the border. Texas has always been a state that has a more kind relationship with its immigrant populations. Is there a way for you to navigate this moment on that issue without being depicted by the Attorney General as being soft?
Yeah, well, you're right. The whole conversation changed after Joe Biden poisoned the issue by flooding the country with unvetted individuals coming from all around the world. And the Democrats thought that the border communities and Hispanics generally would welcome these people with open arms. Turned out that didn't work out very well because they were threatened by the same sort of public safety issues and just being overwhelmed by all this tsunami of humanity and pushed back. And that was one of the reasons why President Trump, certainly that and inflation, while I think President Trump was elected. But I've been endorsed by the National Border Patrol Council, which supported the president, and they are kind of like the good housekeeping seal of approval on these issues. And the Attorney General is just misrepresenting my record. There's just no other way to put it. I guess I could put it more directly, but he's not telling the truth. And part of what we're doing through our advertising and elsewhere is reminding people, because you only run for the Senate every 6 years, as you know, Ben. So a lot of new people entering into the electorate, a lot of new people coming to the state. So that's the campaign is there to help remind them of what the record is. So I'm proud of my record supporting our secure border, and I do believe that I can broaden the appeal based on those individual relationships, those trusts, the trust that many in the leaders in the Hispanic community have of me on many of these issues. Ultimately, I'm hoping that we will get to a better place here where legal immigration is what we all aspire to, while recognizing illegal immigration for the disaster that it's been.
So I have to ask you about your New York Post column, why the SAVE Act matters more than the filibuster. I know you as someone who has been a defender of the filibuster and its importance to the Senate as an institution. But you write in this piece that ran in the New York Post, after careful consideration, I support whatever changes to Senate rules that may prove necessary for us to get the Save America Act and Homeland Security funding past the Democrats' obstruction through the Senate and on the president's desk for his signature. First off, I know that this is something that you have probably been reluctant to do, despite the pressure that has come from conservative side on this issue. The SAVE Act obviously does matter. Why is it so important to you that you're willing to basically say we've got to give up on the filibuster and we have to acknowledge that Democrats are going to get rid of it as soon as they can anyway?
Well, I think the fact that the Democrats are going to get rid of it is pretty straightforward. They've said that, and the only two people who stopped that in previous days were Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. They're gone, and all of the Democrat candidates are pledging their allegiance to eliminating the filibuster. So President Trump's right. This is going to go away once he's out of office. In the meantime, what's changed, Ben, is the fact that the Senate is broken. It's not operating the way it used to, where there was always a willingness, at least, to consider good faith arguments and common ground and to actually make progress and pass legislation that's important to my constituents in Texas and to the American people. That's no longer the case now. And so circumstances have changed, which is why I said I would certainly support, I've reiterated the fact I'd support the so-called talking filibuster or any other reforms that would be necessary to pass the Save America Act. And if you think about it, there's nothing more basic than who gets to vote. If we allow people who are unqualified because they're not American citizens or who don't show a voter ID to cast their ballot, it undermines the whole fabric of our republic. And so that's why I say that this should be a priority, and I'm willing to consider whatever reform measures would be necessary to get this done.
I just want to use the example of what we've seen. You made reference to the wolf in sheep's clothing aspect of Abigail Spanberger. She took over a legislative situation in Virginia where she has a narrow one-vote majority in one of the houses, one that allows her to pursue some incredibly dramatic, some would say crazy policies in terms of what they're putting forward. Certainly, there's a lot of Republicans, old guard Republicans, who have their hair on fire in Virginia right now saying this is not the Virginia way. We used to be able to, there used to be respect. You wouldn't do these kinds of things with a one vote majority. What's to prevent the Democrats, if you do away with the filibuster, to get the SAVE Act, to get this kind of thing moved forward, from just rolling it back the next time that they've got even one seat?
Well, I think that is a very serious concern. And the reason why I've historically been so supportive of the filibuster, because as you know, we've stopped a lot of bad stuff, like packing the Supreme Court, making D.C. and Puerto Rico states, and each with two new Democratic senators and the like. But this is a new day, and I didn't create it. Democrats did. But I think at some point, just saying, well, we're stuck and there's nothing we can do about it, is not an acceptable answer. So I think, given the changed circumstances and certainly the polarization of the country and Democrats' unwillingness to even pay TSA agents who are working without pay at the airport, doing basic things like that are going to require us to try different things. That's why I've supported this idea that Mike Lee and others have come up with, a talking filibuster. I agree. We haven't done this before. It creates a lot of new questions. But I think, we have to be open to other ideas. And the idea that, well, if we let our guard down now, Democrats might change or reconsider, I think is just naive. So I'm willing to consider it.
You can have the Senate procedure debate with Hugh Hewitt or somebody like that. I'm not going to lock you into that and have everybody's eyes glaze over. But I am going to ask you this. You mentioned one of the things that you blocked, which is, of course, packing the court. Yeah. You have colleagues there on the Democratic side of the aisle who have voiced more extreme notions of packing the court than we have ever heard before. I mean, you have to go back to the FDR level to hear anything like it. Sheldon Whitehouse has made it his, lodestar. Do you believe that if you get rid of the filibuster, even if it is a talking filibuster adaptation, that the likelihood that Democrats, under a new president, under a even minor majority, the slimmest of majorities, do you believe that they would pack the court without the ability to prevent it within that body?
Well, Ben, I know you're a student of history as well. And as you know, the filibuster has actually been changed numerous times over history, and particularly most notably during the civil rights era. And at one point, there was no actually way to cut off debate in the Senate originally. And then the number came in at 2/3 of the Senate, and then has subsequently been reduced to 60 votes for cloture. So the idea that the filibuster is somehow sacrosanct and can't be touched or changed at all is ahistorical, to say the least. So I don't know what the future would hold. I mean, obviously, if there's a divided Congress, that would foil the Democrats quite a bit in terms of changing the law. And if obviously we keep a majority and keep the president, Republican president, who's capable of vetoing some of these things, that would help. So I know that I remain concerned about how radical the Democratic Party has become. I agree with President Trump in his State of the Union when he said these people are crazy. They wouldn't even stand up to applaud law enforcement, and they'd rather sit on their hands and support illegal immigrants. And when it comes to removing the number one state sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East, they seem to choose the side of the state sponsor of terrorism. It's amazing the magical powers that President Trump has to have these people take exactly the opposite and wrong decision on almost everything. So these are very challenging circumstances. And what I'm saying is I'm trying to figure out how to accomplish our goals without destroying the institution, But I also don't want to see 2 years of President Trump's remaining time in office just stagnate because the Democrats are uniformly opposing anything and everything he proposes.
I want to ask you a final question about judges, just given your history and how much you care about this. It has been eye-opening for, I think, a lot of Republicans, supporters of President Trump, and perhaps independents even as well, about how much you've seen judges, even lower-level judges, willing to do just about anything to stop his agenda from going into effect. Yeah. I mean, it's become a joke now, that, whenever President Trump does something, a judge has ruled that he must return Maduro to lead Venezuela again. It's just the natural thing that people will go post. Is there something that can be done or that must be done to actually have the judiciary get back to what it's supposed to be doing, as opposed to having, it seems like one ridiculous case after another that's just meant to throw up roadblocks until such time as the Supreme Court can decide that, no, this is a ridiculous objection?
Yeah, you're right. I have thought a lot about this, given my background in history. And my impression is President Trump has done pretty well in the Supreme Court, but you're right, these lower courts have gotten off the rails in many instances, which is the traditional arguments we have with Democrats that judges are not supposed to be policymakers or legislators in robes. Democrats believe that's exactly what they want because they can't win these battles in the legislature or through the political branches, so they have to do it by jamming it through the federal judiciary. So I think these are going to remain. The debate is not going to go away. But I think the most important thing we can do is maintain the majority in the United States Senate. So we have President Trump's ability to appoint good conservative judges, and by that I mean people who will follow the law as written, not as they wish it to be.
Are you in favor of breaking up? Are you in favor of breaking up any of the circuits or making for, is there a solution that would involve, kind of trying to change the way the authority structure works at all?
Well, the Ninth Circuit has gotten to be so big and unwieldy, and there's been a lot of debate over time about doing that. I certainly am open to doing that if necessary. But of course, I'm gratified when I see some of these out of bounds or judicial decisions made at the district court level, reversed by great judges on, for example, the Fifth Circuit that Senator Cruz and I have recommended and that President Trump has appointed. So to me, that remains the immediate recourse. But of course, eventually, at some point, impeachment becomes a question. And of course, that depends on the House voting on articles of impeachment, and then the Senate's role is to have a trial. And it's not unheard of. But to me, maintaining the Senate majority is the single most immediate thing we need to do, and not risk it by nominating somebody who's likely to lose this seat, and perhaps even damage our ability to pick up other seats or maintain the Senate majority. So that and appeals, and certainly if we get another shot, if President Trump gets another shot at the Supreme Court before he's through, I think that would be great. That would make 4 Supreme Court justices and be really an enduring legacy for President Trump.
Thank you so much, Senator John Cornyn, for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Great to be with you, Ben. Thanks a lot.
So there's been a great deal of controversy about the Save America Act. It's been stretching now for quite some time. It's designed to essentially put into place a voter ID requirement when it comes to voting in federal elections. States set their own rules and laws regarding voting, but when it comes to federal elections, we want to have voter ID requirements and basic trust in the process of those elections and how they are conducted. The American people have lost faith in elections. Polling indicates it's not actually just a Republican thing. Republicans and Democrats Democrats alike are actually in favor of voter ID. And this is consistent across multiple polls, even by those that are trying to get a different answer. And yet, Democrats are all standing up against this and turning it into something that is designed to be sexist and racist and all the normal tropes that you can expect. Here's Chuck Schumer.
Yes, but their bill isn't voter ID, number one. It is about voter registration. It allows ICE to kick tens of millions of people off the rolls, and they don't tell them until Election Day, and you show up and you say, you're not registered anymore. You're not registered here. You're not on the rolls.
If there are tens of billions of people who are going to be kicked off the rolls, I think we have a bigger problem than we perhaps estimated to begin with. I would also point out that in the most recent Texas election, the strongest objections about voter fraud came not from any Republican, but from one Jasmine Crockett, who had very valid reasons to be upset with a Dallas regime that denied people, a lot of people, the chance to vote, and then refused at the behest of a compliant judge to keep the voter operation going and keep the doors opened at polling places for an additional 2 hours to make up for all of their screw-ups. Now, of course, that's an election that's run by the party, so the same rules don't necessarily apply. But when it comes to requiring voter ID, this is an enormously popular thing, and Democrats are standing in the way of it for obvious reasons. They believe that people who vote illegally are overwhelmingly going to vote Democrat. But they're also advancing this ridiculous idea, one which you heard from Schumer there, and you'll hear from someone much, much stupider in a moment, that this is going to be something that is going to disenfranchise female voters, black voters, and the like more than any other category.
To protect himself from losing the Senate and the House and probably getting impeached, he wants to change the rules of voting to make it more difficult for everyone, especially women, to vote. If this passes, you won't even be able to mail your ballots. And unless you're in the military, sick, disabled, or overseas, you will have to stand in a line to vote, even though he himself votes by mail.
I think it's pretty funny that this whole especially women thing comes from the fact that there is a part of this bill that would require you, if your name changes, to register that name change. So, of course, this affects disproportionately women who get married and change their name. You know who won married women in terms of the last election? Donald Trump. Okay, you know who would want married women to be voting, especially the ones who want to change their name? Donald Trump. So it doesn't actually stand to any reason that Republicans would not want to have married women voting at all. And that's why this entire thing is a complete lie. It's a total facade. It is racist. It suggests that black people and Hispanics don't know how to get basic ID. Are you suggesting that literally every Hispanic and black driver who you see on the road doesn't have an ID, that they're driving without a license illegally? Of course, that's absurd. And, when it comes to a lot of these jurisdictions, the requirements when it comes to state elections are so low. I mean, in some elections across this country, believe it or not, it is as low as requiring you to have a library card, which is something that even my daughter has. This is the thing that I find so objectionable about this. This is the most basic requirement of determining citizenship in order to be able to vote in our elections, in order to be able to decide who governs us. And you can dismiss it as much as you like, saying that it doesn't happen that much, or if it does happen, it's not a big deal, or it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the election. You are not going to have any of those arguments fly past me. I lived through Florida in 2000. I know what went down there. And that is something that determined the presidency of the United States of America. Citizens deserve the vote, and every non-citizen who votes dilutes the vote of a citizen. It is absurd that these Democrats are standing against it. And it is very telling that this new radical Democrat regime in Virginia, which ran as moderates, which was endorsed by the Wall Street Journal as being moderate, which was endorsed by individuals at AEI as being moderate under Abigail Spanberger, that one of their first priorities, along with mattress recycling fees, along with banning the most popular rifle in Virginia and in the nation, is requiring that no jurisdiction be allowed to vote and then have ballots counted by hand. That tells you everything you need to know about the Democrats. They do not want these votes to be counted accurately. They do not want them to be restricted to citizens, and they believe that stands to their benefit. It's corrupt, it's evil, it's racist, it's sexist, and it's wrong. I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. We will be back with more next week to dive back into the fray.